You think you know why that person left your life. But what if the explanation you repeat to yourself every day is just the part that Taurus lets show? There's a version of this story you haven't told anyone yet, not even yourself. Because in that version, the person leaving isn't about them stopping loving you. It's about a root you built so deep, so firm, that without realizing it, it stopped supporting you and started trapping you. Taurus has this strange gift of turning security into a prison without ever intending to. And the worst part is, the first person to suffer this is never Taurus. It's the person next to them, gradually feeling that they've stopped being loved for who they are and have started being loved for the function they fulfill, that of keeping everything in its place. Is that what happened to you? Could it be that this person left not because of a lack of love, but because of an excess of your need to control what was, deep down, already uncontrollable? In the next few minutes, I'm going to show you the invisible mechanics behind this departure, the patterns that Taurus repeats unconsciously, the exact moment when care turns into control, and the reason why sometimes a person can only leave when they understand that to remain there, they would need to cease to exist as an individual. What if, in the end, the right question was never, why did she leave? But rather a much more uncomfortable one. Who did you become within that relationship? Stay until the end, because the answer you're looking for might not be in the person who left. It might be in a part of yourself that you haven't yet had the courage to face. Taurus doesn't cling out of weakness. Taurus clings because deep down they know the true value of having something solid in this unstable world. And that's why when that person left, it wasn't just a departure. It was an earthquake. It was the ground you thought was permanent, showing you that it was never as firm as it seemed. But here's what nobody told you. Maybe that person didn't leave by chance. Maybe they left because something inside you silently created the conditions for it to happen. Not out of malice, not out of conscious error, but because of an old pattern that Taurus has carried since long before this relationship began. Have you ever stopped to think that Taurus has two faces that almost never appear together? One is the face of loyalty, of devotion, of love that builds slowly and carefully. The other is the face of silent control, the kind that doesn't shout, doesn't demand, but holds on so tightly that it suffocates unintentionally. And it is this second face that usually opens cracks that Taurus doesn't even see until it's too late. Imagine a plant that you water every day at the same time with the same amount of water, without ever asking if it needs anything different. You think you're taking care of it, and you are, in a way. But sometimes care becomes habit, and habit becomes predictability. And predictability, however safe it may seem, can suffocate even the strongest root. Is that what happened in your relationship? Did you water it your way without realizing that the other person might need something else? There's an almost invisible moment when Taurus stops caring for someone and starts caring for the idea of having someone. And these two types of care seem the same on the outside, but inside they are completely different. One looks at the person, the other looks at their own fear of losing their footing, and when someone realizes they are being loved not for who they are, but for the role they fulfill, something inside them slowly begins to drift away. Perhaps that's what you felt. No words, no proof, just that lingering discomfort in the back of your chest, the feeling that, at some point, the relationship stopped being about two people and became about your need for security. And if that's the case, the question you should be asking isn't, why did she leave? But another, much more uncomfortable one that most Tauruses avoid asking themselves, because answering it means admitting that, without realizing it, you confused love with possession, care with control, and presence with ownership over another person's life. It was while searching for answers to this that I found this digital book. The divine path that guides your zodiac sign to a life of purpose speaks precisely to what you are feeling now. The difference between security that liberates and security that imprisons. For those born under Taurus, it acts as a mirror, showing where genuine care ends and where fear disguised as love begins. It doesn't promise to give you ready-made answers. It restores your ability to build true solidity without needing to hold on to anyone to feel whole. You are processing this now, feeling the weight of recognizing a pattern that may have repeated itself more than once in your life. And it is precisely at this moment, with this discomfort still alive, that it makes sense to act, not after the pain passes and you return to your usual autopilot, but now, while this awareness is still open and willing to teach you something. The link is in the first pinned comment. But be aware, this content may be taken down. Click now and download your copy. And now I want to know from you in the comments. At some point in your life, have you ever felt that you were loving someone for the security that person gave you, and not exactly for the person themselves? There's a very subtle difference between loving someone and needing someone to stay there for you to feel safe. On the outside, the two things seem identical. The same gestures of care, the same affectionate words, the same constant presence. But inside, one is born from the desire to see the other person flourish, and the other is born from the fear of losing your footing. Taurus often confuses these two sensations because both come with the same physical comfort, the shared routine, the other person's body nearby, the certainty of a fixed place in the world. And when someone starts to move away from this predictable pattern, Taurus's first impulse is not to ask, "What are you feeling?" but rather to reinforce the existing structure, as if reinforcing the habit were enough to fix the bond. But bonds aren't repaired through repetition. Bonds are repaired through genuine attention to what is changing. And that's precisely where the first thread of the story you're trying to understand lies. Often, what Taurus calls commitment is, in practice, a silent refusal to admit that people, including himself, change over time, and that a healthy bond needs space for that change to happen without threatening the foundation that has already been built. Notice that this confusion is almost never perceived in the heat of the moment. It only appears later when you reconstruct the scenes more calmly and realize that, in many of them, you were more concerned with keeping things as they always were than with truly listening to what the other person was trying to tell you. And this is a silent trap. The more you cling to the known format of a bond, the less space there is for the bond to transform along with the two people who sustain it. Every root that sustains can also, if it grows in the wrong direction, turn into a chain, and it is precisely this silent transformation that usually happens within relationships where a Taurus loves too much and listens too little. Imagine a vine clinging to a wall. At first, the wall provides support. After a while, the vine begins to crack the wall without realizing it, simply by holding on so tightly. Often, Taurus's excessive attachment works like this. They don't want to hold on to anyone, but the way they cling, due to a need for predictability, a refusal to admit change, ends up making the other person feel like they no longer have room to breathe within that relationship. And the most painful thing is that, when the other person finally says they need air, Taurus's first instinct is to hold on even tighter, because for Taurus, letting go seems synonymous with losing. And it was precisely this fear, perhaps, that made you hold on too tightly to the person you most wanted to keep close. There's a phrase that helps to see this more clearly. Holding on tightly isn't the same as loving deeply. A healthy root extends downwards, seeking firm ground. It doesn't wrap itself around what's beside it until it suffocates it. And perhaps this is one of the hardest lessons Taurus needs to learn, that truly loving sometimes means loosening the grip, even when every cell in the body is screaming to hold on even tighter. If you stop to observe honestly, you'll realize that much of what Taurus calls stability is actually fear disguised as good taste. Fear of change, fear of the unknown, fear of discovering that perhaps you don't have as much control over your life as you'd like to believe. And this fear, when not acknowledged, transforms into rigidity. Rigidity in schedules, rigidity in expectations, rigidity even in the way of loving. And no one, no matter how much they love, can breathe deeply within a space that has no flexibility whatsoever. People don't leave just because they've stopped loving. Often they leave because they feel that to remain there, they would need to cease to exist as individuals and begin to exist only as part of a structure that the other person has built. And here lies a painful irony. Taurus builds this structure precisely because it wants to protect the relationship. But protection without room for the unexpected ceases to be nurtured and becomes a kind of museum, a place where everything is preserved with such zeal that nothing else is allowed to grow. And a bond that doesn't grow sooner or later begins to die from within, even if it appears on the outside absolutely stable. Think about how many times you've preferred to maintain an uncomfortable routine simply because change would mean admitting that something wasn't working. This type of resistance, when nurtured for years, creates relationships that seem unbreakable on the outside, but which on the inside have already lost any ability to adapt to what real life demands. And real life, whether Taurus likes it or not, demands adaptation all the time. The rigidity we just mentioned has a real antidote, and it's not giving up your Taurus nature. It's learning to differentiate between solidity and rigidity. The digital book, The Divine Path That Guides Your Zodiac Sign to a Life of Purpose, was written thinking precisely about this blind spot, how to transform the need for security into a flexible foundation, not a cage. It teaches you to build stability that embraces change instead of fighting it. This type of material isn't available forever, and the last copies are practically sold out. The link is in the first pinned comment. The last copies are running out. Click now and begin your journey towards the clarity and genius you deserve. There's a type of silence that Taurus uses without realizing it, silence as a form of control. When someone disagrees, when someone asks for change, when someone expresses dissatisfaction, Taurus often simply doesn't respond. Not because they don't feel anything, but because expressing their own vulnerability seems riskier than maintaining control of the situation through silence. But this silence, to the person on the other side, sounds like indifference. And few things destroy a bond faster than the feeling of screaming for attention from someone who simply chooses not to listen. It was this silence, perhaps, that was the real reason this person distanced themselves from you, not because they stopped caring, but because they grew tired of trying to reach someone who shut down every time the relationship demanded more emotional depth. And the most curious thing is that deep down, Taurus is usually feeling everything with enormous intensity. But processing this intensity aloud seems to expose too much, seems to lose control of the narrative. So silence becomes a shield. And a shield, however efficient it may be at protecting, also prevents any kind of real closeness from getting through. There comes a point, difficult to admit, when a Taurus's partner begins to feel less like a loved one and more like an asset to be maintained. This is never intentional. Taurus doesn't consciously decide to treat someone as property, but excessive zeal, protectiveness, and the need to keep everything exactly as it is can, over time, erase the other person's individuality. And when someone feels they've stopped being seen as a person and started being seen as part of someone else's emotional security structure, leaving ceases to be a selfish choice and becomes an act of survival. Maybe that person didn't leave you. Maybe they left the version of themselves they were becoming within that relationship. This doesn't mean the love wasn't real. It simply means that love on its own is never enough when it comes wrapped in a need for control that even Taurus themselves can't name. And perhaps that's precisely the most difficult point in this whole process, realizing that it's possible to deeply love someone and still hurt that person just by trying to keep them around. Perhaps you've never called it possession, because the word seems too harsh to describe something born of love. But it's worth asking, how many of this person's decisions did you receive with genuine openness, and how many did you receive as a silent threat to the structure you had built together? The honest answer to this question often hurts, but it also often sets you free. Acknowledging this hurts, but it's precisely this kind of recognition that separates those who repeat the pattern from those who finally break with it. The digital book, The Divine Path That Guides Your Zodiac Sign to a Life of Purpose, has an entire chapter on how Taurus can love without erasing the other, on how to protect without suffocating, and on how to transform zeal into freedom instead of zeal into control. If this resonated with you, perhaps it's time to look inward with this tool in hand. Access is becoming increasingly restricted. The link is in the first pinned comment. The last copies are running out. Click now and begin your journey towards the clarity and genius you deserve. And here's the hardest paradox to swallow. Sometimes a person needs to leave your life so that you can finally find the part of yourself that only appears in their absence. While they were there, filling the space, sustaining the routine, being the ground you so desperately needed, you never had a reason to ask who you are when no one is holding your hand. Loss, however painful, is also a revelation. It exposes exactly where you built your identity on the presence of another, instead of building it on your own roots. And perhaps that person left not to destroy you, but to forcefully return to you a question you've been postponing for years. Who are you really, when no one else is watching, when there's no one to applaud your stability or validate your routine? There are signs of this avoidance long before the question becomes conscious. The difficulty in being alone, the rush to fill any silence with a new routine, the physical discomfort in the face of days without defined plans. It's common for Taurus to spend their entire life avoiding this question, filling any possible void with relationships, routines, possessions, and material certainties. But the void left by the absence of that person cannot be filled in the same way. It asks for something else. It asks you to descend to your own route, without intermediaries, without distractions, and discover what truly sustains you when there is no one else to support you. This question is uncomfortable, but it's also the gateway to the next chapter of your life. The digital book, The Divine Path That Guides Your Zodiac Sign to a Life of Purpose, exists precisely for this moment, when the old structure has fallen and you need to rebuild from your own roots, not from the presence of another person. It helps you transform this pain into direction instead of letting it become just a repetition of the same pattern in the next relationship. This material will be taken down soon, so the time to act is now, while this reflection is still fresh in your mind. The link is in the first pinned comment. The last copies are running out. Click now and begin your journey towards the clarity and genius you deserve. Perhaps, in the end, the question, why did that person leave your life, never had a simple answer, because it was always bigger than the other person. It was always about you finding your own ground again, without needing anyone else to support you. Taurus has this rare ability to start over, like the earth restarts after winter, without haste, without fanfare, but with a silent strength that no one notices until they see everything blooming again. The person who left didn't take away your capacity to love. They simply gave you back the chance to learn to love in a lighter, freer, truer way.